Welcome everyone, and today's agenda, we're first going to do some quick introductions, go around the horn, and then we're going to spend a big chunk of time on data sufficiency, which is a type of quantitative question, math question, that's unique to the GMAT. So we're going to spend a big chunk of time on that. Then we're going to take a quick break, go through an overview of the course, talk a little bit about sentence correction, and then wrap up with some overview information about how the GMAT works and where we're going from here. So a couple of quick classroom logistics things. We're going to be asking you to ask questions. So please participate. People have already been chatting in the window. There are a couple different ways, obviously, to ask a question. One way is to send us a message. We'll also show you how to raise your hand and ask a question on the mic. We're going to call on you from time to time. Not everything will be cold call, but occasionally I might ask you to participate publicly. We're going to try to make it as comfortable an environment for everyone as possible. So please jump in. And we're going to have a lot to do, so the breaks are going to be pretty short in number and short in duration. So if you need to jump away, go ahead and click on the blue door, and we'll practice that in a couple of minutes. So who we are, so you can see us. I'm Chris Ryan, and that's me with a terrible haircut. It's not much better now, but it's a little better. And here's my contact information, and I'll jump off the mic so Emily can get on and say hello.
Hello everyone, this is my contact information. Email is the best way to reach me, and I'm out in sunny, sometimes Southern California, and happy to be here.
There are a couple of other moderators in the room right now, folks at the top of the screen. Danielle DiCiaccio is in our Student Services group, so she's here just to make sure everyone's logged on and cool. If you have any questions about logistics, etc., you can send her a text message or just send one to the moderators. And Gerard's here from tech support to make sure that everyone's cool in a technical sense. So now what we're going to do is go around the horn, and it looks like everybody's got a working mic. So we're going to introduce ourselves, and there are three things we want to hear at this point. Who you are, give us your name, tell us what you do, and tell us something unusual about yourself. And while everyone's talking, what we'd like you to do is put your current location on the map. And you're going to do that by selecting the pen tool, which is at the top left and just underneath the cursor, so it's a blue pen. And by selecting that tool, you can make a dot where you are. And I'm going to put a blue dot on where I am because I'm in New York City. So I'm out here on the East Coast. Going to keep a vampire schedule for this class. I love it. That's what I usually do. And I'll just say my name is Chris Ryan. I'm Director of Product and Instructor Development here at Manhattan GMAT and also an instructor. And something unusual, I just learned how to do a particular juggling move called the Mills Mess with Claw. Danielle works in the same office as me and so has seen this. I'll leave it to her to say anything about that. We'll go to Emily next and then go down the list starting with Andrew.
All right, so it's me again, and as I mentioned, I'm in Southern California. I'm actually in Orange County, where I teach our in-person classes in Irvine, as well as many online classes. I've been with the company for about 4 years as an instructor, and I've recently taken on a new role as an instructor trainer, and I've been involved in curriculum development as well as hiring new instructors. So I've got my hands in lots of pies. You may have also seen me on our forum, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. Something unusual about myself, I'm always thrown off by this. An unusual skill, or relatively so, that I have is that I know how to do stained glass, and I have made a couple windows. All right, Andrew, you're next.
My name's Andrew Dabalski. I'm an architect, and something unusual about myself, I guess, is I grew up with 4 dogs all at the same time. So 4 male mutts, so I was always kind of a big dog person.
Fantastic. That sounds pretty cool. I think my wife, who's a huge dog fan, and we don't have any, would have loved that. Angela, why don't we go to you?
Hi, I'm Angela Manalo Lales. I'm a CPA. I work as Internal Audit Director over at the Loma Linda University and Loma Linda University Medical Center in Southern California. And what's unusual? I can't really think of anything unusual, except that I play the piano, the cello, and the flute.
And fantastic. Okay, Ganesh, I'm not sure if your mic's working quite yet. Go ahead and give it a try.
Yes, hi Chris, can you hear me? Yes, my name is Ganesh Kumar and I used to work for Lehman Brothers, and something unusual about myself, I guess, I used to teach little kids how to play tennis in New York City. Yes, that's it.
Fantastic. Also, when you're on the mic, don't forget to click the microphone button off. Okay, Jean-Laurent, you're up.
Hey everybody, my name is Jean Laurent, and let's see, well currently it's not really a job, but I'm a full-time law student at Chapman University here in Southern California, Orange County, and something unusual, I guess, I don't know, I was born and raised in Canada, is that unusual? Not really, but, oh, how about I have, my girlfriend has 4 children, and, you know, so it's pretty unusual for law students to go through law school and also tend to take care of children. That's about it.
That's pretty cool too. Awesome. I'm loving to hear all these details. So, Catherine, you just got in, but let's come back to you because I want to give you a chance to sort of acclimate and get your microphone working and all that. Roshan, I think that your microphone is not working now, but go ahead and give it a try. Got it. Okay. So we'll get that working up next time, hopefully. And Ryan, it's to you.
Hi, my name is Ryan Haberman. I work at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. Something unusual about myself is I'm also into music. I play trumpet in several community bands and jazz bands in Cincinnati, and I also play in my church orchestra.
That's so cool. I think we almost have a semi-orchestra here, maybe with dogs and kids playing various sorts of instruments as well. Might not sound very good, but it would be fun anyway. So, Catherine, do you know if your microphone's working or not?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we heard you loud and clear. So go ahead and jump back on and introduce yourself, say what you do or anything else unusual about yourself. Oops, I think we so just click it once and then let it go and then talk.
Okay, that's probably better. This is Catherine Coro. I work at a company called Rockpoint. Something unusual about myself, I don't know, lots of sports, live by coastal, I don't know, go surfing in Mexico and Costa Rica and those types of things.
Sounds good. So I'm trying to put it all together with everybody. Might be tough to get the orchestra, surfing, but we'll figure something out. Anyway, it's nice to see where everyone is and get a little bit of a sense about you. And for those of you who came in later, I'll go ahead and click back. We'll often have a while you are waiting kind of slide at the beginning of class or just before it. If you don't have the course welcome guide, then you'd go to manhattangmat.com live_etc. To get the PDF, but it should have arrived with your books. Also, let us know if you did not get it. And then at some point along the way, if you didn't already, send us a private text message. We've selected it, so it's just going to come to us, anything that you type, to let us know when and where you're applying to business school, when you're planning to take the GMAT, if you've planned that, and what your goal score or score goal is, if any. So let us know those things. So now we're going to just quickly do a quick tool check, and this will be the last bit of logistics. So there's a software orientation, so we're not going to do a whole lot of things on the tools, but to make sure that you can participate, I want to go through a couple of things. First of all, Windows layout, the layouts of the windows. This is under Tools at the top, Tools, Layouts, probably, or I'm sorry, View Layouts. I wrote it down wrong for myself. View Layouts. You probably are on the default layout, and a lot of people like the wide. Emily likes the wide. Pick one that's useful for you, but probably one of those top two would be what you want to go with. The green check and the red X. At the top, just underneath those menus, you should see a green check. Go ahead and click it right now, and you'll see a check appear next to your name. Just go ahead and click that check that's up at the top and switch it maybe to the X. The way you do it, it's right underneath File or Session. Seems like most have got it. Okay, yep, and that's going to be important. Not even so much for green checks and red X's, but we're going to use that same, what's called a polling tool, to pick answers a lot. So you might notice all the checks have left, and now we're at A, B, C's, and D's. Go ahead and pick something to show us the A, B, C, or D. And that's how we'll poll you quite frequently. Right now, you might not be able to see it, or yes, you can see it, but we're going to also do it in such a way that it's anonymous. So don't worry that you're revealing your hand. Now, speaking of hands, we're going to raise and lower hands. And so the way to do that is exactly as you're doing. Click over to the left, and you see numbers appear and so forth. And that lets us see if you've got a hand you want to ask a question. Also, some people have found the emoticons. So I will sometimes ask you to give me a smiley face or give me a thumbs down. And we can get the sense of the class, and this is all public. There's no way to do it privately. So we'll use it from time to time, not typically to get your answers to a GMAT problem, but it's useful nonetheless. And then the blue door, everyone go ahead and pretend that they're stepping away. The way you do that is at the bottom right. That way we know not to call on you and say, hey, Andrew, and you've actually needed to let the dogs out or something. I'm not sure if you're living with dogs right now, but whatever it is, let us know when you're not here by clicking on that blue door. Still recording in the sense you're still in the room. Don't actually exit Elluminate. So give me a smiley face if you're ready to move on, or give me a thumbs down if you're not. Oh, almost everybody. Okay, I'll take that as a basic yes. So the next thing we're going to do is dive right into the real stuff, data sufficiency. So Data sufficiency, as I mentioned before, is a type of question that's unique to the GMAT, so that's why we're going to spend some real time on it. And what we have found over time is that the key to this question type, and to doing well on this question type, is to have a good process. Maybe half the errors that people make are ones because they weren't following a good process. This is a math problem wrapped in kind of a little logic game, and so you've got to learn the rules of the game and get those down pat before you do well on this type. So that brings me to a quick side note. Some of you were texting me before class that you were kind of unhappy with how the initial diagnostic test went. Do not look at those scores as meaningful really in any way. The deal on that initial test is to get you back into a test-taking mode, to very, very roughly see, do you need to spend more time on math or verbal, but do not take it as predictive of what's going to happen on the GMAT or what kind of score increase can you get. For one thing, you've probably never done a data sufficiency before. And if you have, even if you've taken the GMAT before, do not look at this first practice test as you're getting back into the swing of things as predictive of what's going to happen, okay? So, how does this type work? Well, the components of a data sufficiency are, first of all, there's a mystery. And that mystery is somehow quantitative. It's not, you know, who shot JR, I'm totally dating myself by that, or what have you. It's a quantitative mystery, something like what is X, or is X even? And then there are two clues to that mystery. And your job is to figure out, can you solve the mystery with the clues, and if so, how? So, let's take a look at a sample question. Here's the mystery. How old is Isaac? Sometimes the quantitative mystery will be expressed in equation form or something like that, what is X or whatever, or it could be just pure words, how old is Isaac? And then here are two clues. First clue is listed with the number 1, and there it is. And then there's a second clue. And what I'd like you to do is to take 20 or 30 seconds, look over these clues and the mystery, and figure out whether or not you can solve the mystery with the clues. And then type that to me. Type that into the chat window. It's only going to go to us moderators. So figure that out, whether or not you can solve the mystery. That's great. I'm seeing some answers come in. I want to make sure that everybody's going to send me something. Think about this. Can you solve this mystery? Awesome. And in fact, I see some of you even know the answer choices already. So, yes, you can solve the mystery, indeed. And here are the answer choices. These are the same for every data sufficiency. And what I'd like you to do now is to use the polling and put in your answer A, B, C, D, or E up top. Fantastic. I'm going to show you what you all picked. You all picked C. And what I'm going to periodically do is show you this way if there's a split in the answer choices, but every single one of you students picked C, which is fantastic. Now, a couple of things about these data sufficiency questions. One thing is that we like to say that the statements are your friends. And there are three ways in which the statements are your friends. One is that they're there to help you. That is, you've got a mystery here, and sometimes they even give you some information along the way with the mystery. Like they'll say, if Isaac is blah, 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 how old is Isaac? You should know that you can never solve the mystery with just the information given in the question alone. You can never just solve it that way. You always need the statements. They're your buddies. Second, those statements are your friends, and your friends don't lie to you. So that means you should always start from the statement later on in the process, take it as truth. You're not trying to prove or disprove a clue, a statement. You're taking it as true. And because they don't lie, they don't contradict each other. That doesn't mean they give you the same information or the same kinds of information or what have you, but they don't contradict. And if you find yourself somehow thinking that the statements contradict, guess what? You've got it wrong. So that's a couple of points about the statements to remember, that they're your buddies, they're your friends. Also, you should memorize the answer choices. Here you're going to see these on the test screen, but you should not be sitting there trying to figure out, wait, what's B again? You got to memorize these. This is just like knowing in checkers how to move your piece. In class today, we're going to give you a little handy mnemonic, A1, B2, and then together either, neither. Some people like to remember 1 to 10, 1 to TE and N. We're also going to have some other tools for working with the answer choices. And after today, we're not going to put that on the screen because we're going to assume that you've done some work with this. Now, let's go back to the question for a minute. And I'm actually going to cover up the answer choices to give myself some room here. I am a stickler for good process. And so even though this question is relatively easy, I'm going to go ahead and take the opportunity to show you what I think good process is. And if your paper looks like this, say, then here's a layout for how to keep track of the pieces. Where people go wrong on data sufficiency is they don't keep straight 4 different things. 1, anything that's given as information in the question, in the prompt. 2, the question itself. 3, statement 1, and 4, statement 2. And so I think that here's a good way to keep it straight. You put any givens in the question prompt over on the left side of your paper. Now I can't look around and see what you're doing, but please give this a try. Then over on the right, you're going to put the question. Now I don't want you to write down the question verbatim. I want you to do some processing with it to turn it sort of more mathematical. So go ahead and type in how you might make this question look more mathematical. I don't want you to type in, how old is Isaac? Type in for me how you might make it look more mathematical. I'm looking for the question for how old is Isaac. I'm seeing some people type in some things about the statements, and that's great. We're also going to translate those, but I want the question. Yeah. So I'm seeing some people. This is great. Various ways to do it. It's all fine. One thing I'm a stickler for is a question mark. So you could write I for Isaac or X for Isaac's age or something like that. And I believe in putting down question mark because if you put I equals X or something like that and say, oh, I got to always look for X. Well, that's not always a good thing to do because the question might use X. In fact, you might not be looking for X. You might be looking for X squared or X divided by 3 or something, whatever it is. And so the question mark, though, is a great symbol to know that that's what the question is. That's what it does for us, right? So something like I equals question mark would be a good way to go. Now, statement 1, you should mark with a 1. So when you start dealing with statement 1, make sure that you write down 1 and a point or a parentheses or something like that, so you keep track. What's statement 1? And now, if you haven't already, go ahead and type in what you think statement 1 might look like. And I'm seeing some folks already did it, but go ahead and type it in again real fast. Yeah. Fantastic. P equals 18. And some folks, it's great, actually noted, yeah, there's something subtle there, that we know that Paul is younger than Isaac. So we know something about Isaac as well. You could assume then that I is greater than 18, or greater than or equal to 18 for rounding or something like that. But you might not even get that down in this case. So I'm going to say you just put down P equals 18. Now thinking about the answer choices, which I'll repeat in summary form up here. A is 1, B is 2 by itself, C is together, D is either alone, and E is not enough. Which ones of these can we rule out at this point? Go ahead and type them in. Which answer choices can we rule out at this point? Good. Now I'm seeing some variations. We review the answer choices, which I didn't spend a ton of time on because it seemed like you all knew them pretty well. But A means that statement 1 by itself works, but not statement 2. B means the opposite. Statement 2 works by itself, is enough information, but not the opposite, not statement 1. C means that you need them both together, but by themselves they don't work. D means either statement works, and E means you don't have enough even if you put the statements together. So let's see here. Is statement 1 enough? Go ahead and give me a smiley face or a thumbs down if statement 1 is enough or not. Yeah, statement 1 isn't enough, right? So what I want you to try now is take your laser pointer, and laser pointer we're going to occasionally use. The laser pointer is this guy here. Looks like an exploding firecracker. Click on that, and you'll get a little guy that looks like this, and I want to see a whole bunch of little red dots on the screen. Yeah, and if you drag it around, then it moves, and yeah, hey, everybody's going nuts. So click on that exploding firecracker laser, and what I'd like to see with all these fireflies is put them over here. I'm going to go back to a finger so I can distinguish myself. Put them over here, what we can rule out. Seems like we've got some consensus around we can rule out A, and yes, indeed, we can rule out D, either one. If 1 is not sufficient, then we can rule out A, and we can rule out D. That is such an important rule that we actually create a grid. And that grid we call A, D, B, C, E. And so write that down in your notes. A, D, B, C, E. If statement 1 is sufficient, then the answer choices must be A or D. Then the correct answer must be A or D. If 1 is not sufficient, then the correct answer is B, C, or E. And it seems really, silly to jot that down. It's not. Trust me. I use this all the time whenever I'm solving a problem. And in this case, we are able to rule out A and D because from P equals 18 by itself, we cannot know how old Isaac is. By the way, when you're writing things down, don't write down both statements and then start applying the grid. Write down the first statement first, and then just look at that, P equals 18. Does that tell me what I is? No, it doesn't. And then I can rule out A, D, and keep B, C, E. Now we go to statement 2. And I'll just go ahead and push forward here. Some folks already wrote in what they wanted to translate 2 into, but go ahead and type that back into the direct message window to us, what statement 2 can be translated to. Give you 15, 20 seconds on that. Great, it seems like most of you have put it in. Be careful when you're doing the translation. Most of you got it right, but just be careful on the direction. We've got Paul is exactly 10 years younger than Isaac. That translates to something that's a little bit out of order of the words. It translates to P equals I minus 10. Keeping with the letters we've already chosen here on this board. Or you could say I equals P plus 10. Notice, just keep track of where the minus would go, that it's not 10 minus I, and it's not I plus 10. As it turns out, you could make that kind of error and you'd still get the same answer on data sufficiency. So one of the nice things about data sufficiency is it can be a little bit forgiving of slight errors in algebra or something like that. Because you're really just looking for, do you have enough information, not actually what the answer is. So with this, statement 2, I have enough information, right? I can figure out P 18, I put in that, 18 equals I minus 10, and I get I equals 28, so my answer is B, right? Give me a smiley face or a thumbs down on that. So my answer is B at this point, right? Oh, Andrew's giving me the thumbs down. So is Ryan. Andrew, jump on the mic. Tell me what I did wrong.
Well, that statement alone is not enough to tell you how old Isaac is because you don't know how old Paul is, correct?
That is correct. And I made an error that's very easy to make under pressure. I'm sorry if I led you into it, everyone. It's easy to look at both statements together by accident because you've written them both down and it's hard to forget stuff you just knew. So you have to be sure, after you've looked at statement 1 and made a decision on AD or BCE, that when you put down statement 2, in a sense, you kind of cover up or forget about statement 1. Now you shouldn't literally draw an X through it. Some people actually put their finger over it on their page, put their hand over it, physically hide it, so that they remember to forget it. So I'm making this point now because on a simple problem, yeah, it's easy to keep straight, but under exam pressure and on a more difficult problem, you could easily let the statements carry over one into the other and accidentally pick an answer you didn't mean to. So statement 2 by itself is not enough, exactly as Andrew said, and so I can rule out B. Now, what some people do, it's a good practice, is write down literally 1 and 2 together when they get to that stage. And then put down something like 18 equals I minus 10. And we've all determined that that's enough because C is our answer. So, let me pause here. Emily's got some good comments on the board. Do you want to jump on the mic?
Yeah, there are two errors. You just mentioned one of them. Statement carryover is process-related error. When you think you are looking at one statement by itself, but you are subconsciously or unwittingly using the other one, and therefore looking at both together, but thinking you're looking at them alone. The sort of the flip side of a process error is thinking it's okay to use both pieces of information before you've done due diligence. It's very natural for people to dive right in and use everything on the page, right? This is what you do in your work most likely. You use all the information available to you. But the way these choices are worded basically prevents you from doing that. Three of the choices talk about statements alone, so you do have to deal with them individually before you're ever even allowed to combine them.
That's fantastic, and that's one of the reasons why I would say when you've written down statement 1, first deal with that before you write down statement 2. And by deal with that, I mean make a decision as to whether or not it's sufficient. In fact, what some folks do is they literally write sufficient or not sufficient or NS after a statement in order to make sure that they've kept it straight and they've done the work for that statement before moving on to the next one. And in this case, we would of course say that's not sufficient. Now, if you use the grid, and once you've become practiced with the grid, then the grid takes the place of writing down sufficient or not sufficient, because by crossing out A and D, you've actually said to yourself, oh, one's not sufficient. But especially early in the process, it's not a bad habit at all to write down NS or write down S after a statement you've made that decision, so you don't fall into that second process error that Emily talked about, where you are inadvertently combining the information, because that's what you would do on a regular problem-solving problem, a sort of standard math question on the GMAT. You, of course, grab everything you can and see if you can solve the mystery. Notice your question. The average amount of time per question is 2 minutes. We'll talk about that towards the end of the class. So it's not a lot of time. It's one of the reasons why you actually want to drill good process even on easier problems so that it works in your favor on hard problems. And you're not sitting there puzzling out, did I mean C or D? Of these answer choices, the ones that, if people don't use a grid, the ones that people mix up are C and D, because they both kind of seem like both. But they are not. They are very different. So let's go on quickly to just review some of these points. The grid that we draw on our scrap paper is A, D, B, C, E. When you evaluate statement 1, if it's not sufficient, you cross off A, D. If it is sufficient, you cross off B, C, E. And in this case, we've said statement 1 is not sufficient. Statement 2 is insufficient on its own, so be careful not to suffer from statement carryover. Do not pick B in this circumstance. And when you evaluate the statements together, we see, yeah, we can get Isaac's age. C is the answer. Now, by the way, how old is Isaac? Go ahead and put it into the polling up at the top. Okay, I am going to go ahead and publish the poll. We've got some people saying B, and some people saying E. Let's see. So we've got a variety here. Angela, do you want to jump on and defend your answer?
What was my answer? B? It's 18 plus 10, 28.
Sure, that totally makes sense. So, Ryan, do you want to jump on and say why not 28? Isn't Isaac 28 years old?
This is a data sufficiency question, so we don't actually have to solve it. We just have to prove that it's possible to solve.
That's exactly right. So I agree with both of you. Yes, Isaac is, in fact, 28, but we don't care specifically what that number is. Now, that might seem paradoxical. You say, wait a second, aren't we supposed to solve the mystery? The whole key to being efficient on data sufficiency is realizing that as soon as you know you can get a number, you do not have to actually get that number. As soon as you know there's one definite value for Isaac's age, you can stop. So yeah, it wasn't hard to figure out. Let's look back at it. It's not hard to figure out how old Isaac is. But let's say there's a lot of algebra involved. You might know earlier that you can get a single number for Isaac's age before you actually get that number. In that case, stop. Please stop. Do not do all the computation out. You just need to know that you can get a definite number, and you could figure it out if you had to. So, let's just recap with a couple of do's and don'ts. Use the grid. Don't suffer from statement carryover. And as Emily said, don't accidentally use both statements when you mean to use just one. All right, let's do another example. I'm going to clear the windows here and go ahead and give this one a try. I'll jump off the mic. Okay, I gave you about a minute and change on that one. Not a whole lot of time. And I'm seeing a split between B and D and some question marks. So, not that you can actually pick question mark, but you know. So let's just review some terms here. All of a sudden, like, we jacked it up in terms of mathematicalness. What is an integer? I'm going to switch over and have you all be able to type to each other, and go ahead and type some integers into the chat window, and everybody will be able to see everybody's integers, and just go ahead and type some in so we know what we're talking about. Integers. Go ahead, type them all in. Not all of them, some of them. Yeah, love what I'm seeing. So integers, numbers like 1, 2, 3. Andrew's given us a favor and made us realize that 0 is 1 as well. -1 is an integer, so -1, -2, -3, all that kind of thing. No fractions, that's a great way to put it. Full numbers, yep, whole numbers. So sometimes people think of whole numbers just as positive or 0 integers, but negative integers like -1, -2 also count. So also, we'll come back to the other term multiple in a minute. I also want to ask you how this question is different from the other question. I'm going to put the question that we had before up on the screen. How old is Isaac? And I want to know how this one's different from other questions. Ryan, awesome. Value versus yes, no. What's that mean? Go ahead, jump on the mic.
The different data sufficiency question types are, it can be asking you what is the specific value, so like is X 26? Or another question is just yes, no. So this question is asking yes or no is x, a multiple of 9 yes or no is x 18 between 20 and 26.
I'd agree with you in almost everything you said. That's fantastic. Except you said a value question could be, is x 26? What would be a proper answer to that kind of question?
That would also be yes, no.
That's right, that's right. So a value question is something in which they're looking for that specific number, 26, but they'll ask it in some way like, what is x? Or what is the number of letters in the Latin alphabet? Or something along those lines. Whereas a question that is phrased without a question word, notice these questions have what, or how many, or when. Those WH or H words signal value. You're looking for a number. Whereas when you start the question with a verb, like is the integer x between 20 and 26 inclusive, the answers are yes or no, or I don't know, maybe, could be. But notice you're not asking a particular number there. A bad or an invalid answer to this question would be 21, because that's not what's being asked. So exactly as Emily put, you're looking for helping verbs at the beginning of these kinds of things. Is, does, can, should, etc. Probably won't see should in the data sufficiency. Now, let's go ahead and lay out how we might make this question, this data sufficiency, fall out on our paper. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm going to say x equals integer over here, because I know that that's the case. And I use a little abbreviation like x equals int. Now, type in, and I've returned it to just typing to the moderators, to us, type in how you might put this question down on your paper. Go ahead and think about it. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to figure out how you might put this question down on paper. Go ahead. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of good thinking, and some folks are like, hey, I'm not quite sure. And that's totally cool, because that's why we're here. It's session 1. So we've got down that we know x is an integer. So x is a number like 1, 2, 3, or -1, -2, or 0 for that matter. And we're asking, is that integer x between 20 and 26 inclusive? And so there are a lot of different ways people have written them down, and I think every single way where people have asked it is fine, or have written it down. One way you might actually do it is to write something like this. Is x equal to 20, comma, 21, literally write it out. Because it doesn't take that long. I'm doing it while I'm talking to you. And I hit return, and there you can see it all. Or I could put in some dots in there. Is x equal to 20, 21, ... or 26. So don't worry about, well, how do I represent a range of numbers or something like that? 1, just use ... 2, feel free, if the range is small enough, to use just listing. Just list them all. I got a problem we're going to see in a few minutes. I got that problem wrong because I didn't do this. I was too cool for school. I didn't write the numbers down, and I got it wrong, even though it was only a few numbers. And if I had written them down, I think I would have caught my error. So just feel free to write them all down. Now, I want you to also, one other thing, I noticed some people use the question mark. I think it's really important to make sure you use the question mark, so I want to see that from everyone. And I also really like keeping the helping verb, is. If you simply write x equals 20, and forget about the question mark and forget about the is, you're not going to remember it's the question. You have to remember it's the question. That's the thing you're trying to answer. So please, 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 keep a question mark, keep the helping verb, or something. Now, here's another variation on the previous problem. I want to ask you, which of these statements is easier to deal with? Go ahead, type in, whether 1 or 2, type it into me. Which of these statements do you think is easier to deal with? Yeah, I'm getting kind of a consensus around the second statement. Yeah, neither one's super duper an obstacle, but if we see that the second statement's a lot shorter and it looks a lot simpler because it's actually telling us what x is, then we ought to start with that statement. And this happens maybe 10, 15% of the time. Your default is to start with statement 1, and that's fine. There are some people who go into the exam and say, you know what, I never figured out how to start with statement 2. I'm going to just start with statement 1 because that's my go-to. It's fine by then. But I'd like you to give a try to being ready to start with statement 2 on occasion, because you can actually knock out some answer choices that way. If it's easier to deal with, go ahead and start with it. So you're going to actually write down statement 2 first. You put down x equals 18. This is what your paper looks like. And now, what I want to know is that information sufficient to answer the question? Is 2 sufficient? Answer me yes or no. Type it in the window. Is that information sufficient? Okay, Catherine, I'd like you to jump on the mic and defend your answer, if that's cool.
Since you know the number is 18, you can determine that it's not 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, or 26. So even though you're saying the answer is no, that still means that you have enough information to determine what the answer is.
That's right on. It's kind of weird because it's a definite no to the question. But a definite no is as good as a definite yes when it comes time to answering a yes-no question. That's weird. So that's one of the reasons why yes-no data sufficiency questions are harder in some ways than a value question. Value question, we're used to what's good and what's bad. If I find the number, it's good. If I don't find the number, it's bad. On a yes-no data sufficiency question, yes is good, a definite yes is good, but a definite no is also good. It's just a maybe or I don't know which is bad. So this doesn't show up all that much, but it shows up enough that you need to be ready for it. A definite no, like this x equals 18, telling you no, x is not 20 or on the 26, is perfectly good from a data sufficiency point of view. So now, because we started with statement 2, we got to switch up the grid a little bit. And Ganesh, I'd love you to come on the mic and tell us how we changed the grid.
If you start off with 2, it is now BDACE because if you rule out B, or if B is sufficient, you will rule out A, C, E automatically. And you need to find out whether D is an answer as well by looking at 1 later on.
That's fantastic and exactly right. So the way you switch the grid up is you just switch the place of the A and the B in front. Don't switch anything else. B, D, A, C, E is your grid, and everything else is the same. The position of the D, the C, the E is the same. Just switched A and B, which are the only two non-symmetrical answer choices that single out 1 or single out 2. So you just swap those two and use the grid the same kind of way. Because statement 2 is sufficient, we cross out A, C, and E, and now we're left with B and D. Now, what I'd like you to do is type in, and Emily's putting in fantastic, and cut and paste this into your Word document or jot it down in your notes. If you start with 1, use the A, D, B, C, E grid. Start with 2, use the B, D, A, C, E grid. And never switch partway through. You make this decision to start with 2 and just keep going with it. And don't spend a lot of time trying to decide which statement to start with. Glance at them, make a decision, and then go with that. So now, moving on to statement 1. What does the term multiple of 9 mean? Type in some multiples of 9, and I'm going to let you type them to everybody. Type in some multiples of 9. Go ahead. Yep. Sorry, Ryan, I not switched it fast enough for you. Yep. Those are multiples of 29. 9 times 1, 9 times 2, 9 times 3. Notice those are all 9 times an integer. In fact, for next week, you're going to be doing some number properties work in between now and next week, and this stuff is in the book you're going to be working out of. Oops, jumped off the mic there for a second. Sorry about that. So statement 1, next week, by the way, this number properties stuff, all this about multiples, and 9 is, in fact, Ganesh wrote it in there as x equals 9y, where y is an integer. So that sort of ties together this concept of multiples and integers. So 9 is 9 times 1, 18 is 9 times 2, 9 times 3, 9 times 4. So integers, you could use -9 and 0. It turns out that multiples in GMAT land, for the most part, are positive multiples. They usually wind up restricting the real range of the problem to positive numbers when they're dealing with multiples. But technically, yes, 0 is a multiple of 9, and -9 is a multiple of 9 as well, technically. Doesn't show up too much on the GMAT, though. So if x is one of these numbers, and I just stopped when I got up to 36 because I'd go even higher, is x one of these numbers? Go ahead and put it in, type it in. Is x one of these numbers? If x is one of those numbers, this is tricky. Yeah, I'm seeing some definite no's, even though we don't know which of these numbers x actually is. We know x is not one of these numbers, so we have another definite no. It's kind of strange again, and it's even stranger than the first one because we don't actually know what x is. But we know that x is not one of those numbers, because none of those are multiples of 9. And so, what can we do? Knock out B. And the answer to this is, in fact, D. So this is a pretty tricky question. Those of you who picked B, nice job getting through this part and the definite no here. But the thing that's tricky is to realize that you don't even necessarily need to know what the value of the underlying variable is to answer many yes-no questions. That's another way in which these yes-nos are just evil little buggers. I'll give you another example. Is n even? If I tell you the statement 1 that n is a multiple of 4, then in fact I know that n is even. All the multiples of 4, 4, 8, 12, 16, ... are all even. But I don't know which one n is. And the GMAT loves this kind of business. So that's why we're here, is to unveil the traps. So let's take a look at just a quick review on this problem. Again, the correct answer is D. Statement 2 is easier this time, so the grid becomes BDACE, as Ganesh laid out for us. Statement 2, we do the same kind of thing. If it's not sufficient, we cross off the top row. If it is sufficient, we cross off the bottom row. Now, you got to be careful. What we put down here is that no is not the same thing as insufficient. A definite no is as good as a definite yes. It's just the maybe, the mix of no's and yeses that's bad. Last statement. Remember, we don't know what the integer x is, but we know it's not between 20 and 26, so D is the answer here. So, a couple of additional do's and don'ts. Do start with the easy statement, and don't confuse no with insufficient. Now, before I go on, please raise your hand if you have any questions about the process here. So now we're going to get into some real GMAT questions, ones from old exams. So any questions on the process? Raise your hand. Give me a smiley face if we're ready to go on. One of those confused faces? No. All right. So let's boogie into the next part of data sufficiency, which has to do with rephrasing. We're going to take a break after this part, so hang tight. This is our first real problem. And let me say this, just one point of philosophy. If a problem seems easy to you, respect it. If it's easy to you, respect it, because quote-unquote easy problems have a lot to teach you. Sort of bow to it when you walk in the room. And so if we in the class are doing a problem that you say, this is really easy, still follow good process. Use it as a chance to practice process and to improve your speed. Study the problem to make sure you understand all the aspects of it, because you want to make sure you get those right. Now, if a problem seems really hard for you, you're like, man, this is above my level right now, go ahead and still attack it. Bow to it first, and then go ahead and jump in punching. Don't be intimidated by any problem. See if you can knock out a couple of answer choices using the grid or what have you. So here we go with our first problem, which is from the 11th edition of the official guide, which was just the previous one to the one you have now, the 12th edition of the official guide. Here it is right now. You've got 2 minutes. You may start now. Okay, that's 2 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and publish the poll. Every single one of you picked D. Emily and I did not, because we weren't playing. So y'all picked D, and that's fantastic. What I'd like to do, I don't want to spend tons of time on this question, but Jean-Laurent, would you like to come on and talk about how you thought about this?
Sure. So for some strange reason, I looked at statement two. Well, first I wrote out the question with a little question mark, as you say we should do. And basically I wrote, exactly pretty much what it was in the form that it's there. So basically, so that I knew that I needed to figure out what X was. And then I saw number 2, and I thought 2 looked easier because it just jumped out at me for some reason. So I drew my BDACE grid, and it immediately jumped out at me without figuring out what X is, that we could solve for X. So I knew that I could cross out ACE, and then just glancing at 1 quickly, saw that I could figure out what X is for that as well, and so that I knew that the answer was D.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. I didn't get everything down on paper quite yet, but you read this and you thought to yourself, what I really need to know is what X is. Andrew, jump on. Yep.
I just had a question regarding whether or not you almost always have to put each of these statements into a mathematical equation.
It might not be an equation per se, but there will be some relationship that goes down, and so it will wind up often being an equation. It could be an inequality. It could wind up being some other property of the quantities in question, like X is an even number, or something else which you might not totally represent as an equation. But yes, most of the time you're going to wind up trying to turn the facts of the case, the clues, into some kind of equation. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So, so that's fantastic. Jean-Laurent, you looked at this and you saw that you didn't need to solve for X, and that's great. There are a couple things here I want to go through. Let's first jump back and say what you did to the question, and there might have been a little prompt for everyone up here about rephrasing the question. But one important point is that the real question is, what is the value of X? The GMAT is really asking what X is. This 15% business up here, what number is 15% of X, is just some kind of garbage they put in to try to disguise the real question. So it's very, very smart to try to rephrase the question to get at what the GMAT is really asking. Likewise, the statements themselves are disguises. They tell you something, they're the truth, but they also disguise stuff. So we want to translate them down onto paper and then see what they tell us. So it is true, Catherine, you're asking a great question. They are technically asking for what is 0.15x. So you might first write down on your paper to translate this exactly. You might write down, and I think this is very good practice, 0.15x, or 15 over 100 times x, equals question mark. But then the real question is, well, what is x? I would avoid putting in another variable like, say, y or z, and then saying, well, what is y or z? I would just go ahead and say, what is that question mark? And so then you can rephrase this question to just simply, what is x? Does that make sense, Catherine? Yep.
But it says what number is 15% of x? So if the statement 1 and statement 2 got you to a number and says x is 100, then 15% of 100 would be y, wouldn't it? Which means that we would be looking for y and not x.
That's a fantastic question. So in one sense, the real answer to this, let's say x is 100, then the real answer to the mystery up here that you'd have to submit to get a prize would be 15. But let's say that I walked up to you on the street and said, I'm going to give you $1,000, Catherine, if you answer me this question. What number is 15% of x? And you get to ask me one question first, and the only deal is it can't be the same question. And in fact, you can't even be asking me for the same number. So what question would you ask me?
Can you say that one more time? Sorry, I was reading at the same time, sorry.
No worries. So if I came up to you on the street and I said, what number is 15% of x? And you get to ask me one question first to get $1,000, what is the simplest question you could ask me?
Oh, that's fair. What is x?
That's exactly it. And that simplification, which actually it's not the same question. You're not allowed to do this in algebra. If you have 0.15 x equals blah, blah, and you can't just remove the 0.15 from one side of a regular equation, right? But you can do it when the other side is this question mark, because what you're trying to do is really isolate out what that x is. Now, we got to be a little bit careful, and we'll see about how you do that. But in this case, yeah, you would just ask me, well, what's x? And I would give you a number. I would say 100, say, and then you'd say, okay, the answer to your question is 15. Give me my 1,000. So that's the way to think about it. So again, the kernel of this question is what is x? And that's what we want to rephrase this question to. And we also want to translate the statements. So for instance, you might translate and actually write down on your paper 18 equals 0.06 x, right? Now, you might have gone further and figured out by dividing 18 by 0.06 that x is actually 300, and gotten to the idea that the GMAT is really telling you that x is 300. But Jean-Laurent stopped here, right? Why did you stop before figuring out, and I know you started with statement 2, but talk about statement 1, Jean-Laurent. Why didn't you actually figure out that x is 300?
Just because I guess I'm not that good at doing math in my head. So as soon as I figured out that I could do it, without calculating anything, I stopped.
No, that was a super wise course of action. We want to be lazy on the GMAT. And I'm not saying you're lazy in real life. I'm just saying here, be lazy. As soon as you look at this bad boy of an equation, I do think it's good practice to write it down. As you're looking at the screen, jot down 18 equals 0.06x. And that's sort of your mental processing of it. Then have the realization, bang, I can solve for x. Yes, I could divide 18 by 0.06. But that's what the GMAT wants you to do. That's what the GMAT is trying to get you to burn time on. That's why this question exists. They didn't write down x equals 300. They disguised it somewhat because they want to get some people to actually figure out what x is and burn time. You've got to stop as soon as you realize that you can solve for x by dividing 18 by 0.06. What that number works out to be, it happens to be 300. Who cares right now? So if you can stop earlier in the process you save time, and time is money on the exam. So you can just say, yeah, x is some number, and so therefore I can cross out B, C, and E. Likewise, when you translate the second statement, you should stop there. Yeah, you can figure out that x is 300, but I'd rather you stop earlier. And so our answer is D. Keep knocking this thing out with a big fat pen. So D is our answer. Whoa. And I'll make that a little bit bigger so we can all see it's D. And the key is, for time's sake, don't solve for x. As soon as you write down an equation such as this one or such as that one, where all you need to do to solve for x is to divide by one number by another, then stop. So this is a real question. This is number 34, as I said, from the 11th edition. And think about how this question was designed. This was the real question. What is x? X is 300. X is 300. And then they just built in disguises. Well, let's make it 15% of x. Let's disguise this by putting it as 18 equals 6% of x. Let's disguise this other way. So the whole thing that you're doing is really reading the GMAT, sort of peeling back the disguise, and you're figuring out what it's really asking you and what it's really telling you. Now, there are a few different types of rephrasing. One is just simply translating English into math. So 1/3 of x, is that greater than 20% of y? You want to just write that down as it is. Try to translate it into math language. And if you aren't that practiced right now, that's why you're here. You're going to be learning that along the way. Another type of rephrasing is just sort of unraveling the disguise. And these manipulations are algebraic manipulations. So take a look at this question here and think about, what might we do to this? What are the kinds of things we might do? Raise your hand if you've got ideas about how to manipulate this. We want to jump on the mic? And you East Coasters? Yeah, Ganesh, jump on.
I would distribute the x, and then after distributing the x, I would try to simplify and hope.
Yep, that's great. That first, what we call distribution of the x to these other pieces, is exactly the first step I would do too. And then we do all this other stuff. We realize we can cancel out the ax, because we're subtracting it from both. We've got ax minus ax, so it becomes just a sort of red herring. And so the real question is just, is bx equal to -3/2? And you might stop there, or you could keep going, depending. Another type of rephrasing is just like the one we saw. What is 15% of x? Well, the minimum we need is what is x? What's that value of x? And finally, we might have something that's a little bit coded, like say y squared is less than y. What I want you to do is type in for me, what numbers could y be, where y squared, y times y, is actually less than y. It's actually a smaller number than y. Go ahead and type that in. Okay, good. I'm seeing some responses here. Now remember, less than means to the left on the number line. To the left on the number line. So yeah, let me just walk through a couple of ways of looking at this. One is kind of technical. We might say, okay, y squared is less than y, and I subtract y from both sides. I'm actually not suggesting you do it this way, but I'm just showing you for giggles. So you say, oh, y squared minus y, and I can do this factoring thing and figure out they have opposite signs, and I get this whole thing saying, actually, y is between 0 and 1. Where y has a positive sign, y minus 1 is a negative sign, y is between 0 and 1. This way is pretty tough to do on the fly. I think a better way is what I kind of asked you to do, which is to plug and remember. What numbers get smaller when squared? You try, say, a half squared is 1/4, and that's less than a half. Careful, those of you who said negative numbers. Negative numbers, y squared is bigger than y, because it becomes positive. Even if it's closer to 0, say like negative a half squared is positive 1/4, which is technically bigger because it's to the right on a number line. So this is one of those where you say, okay, proper fractions, and eventually, this is just one of the tricks of the GMAT. They actually like this particular one, y squared less than y, and it's just true for y between 0 and 1. And so that's a code where you're not doing all this stuff in between the code here and the reality there. So let's try a few more problems. We're going to boogie here until about 10:50. Hang tight, 10:50 my time, and then we're going to take a break. So got another 25 minutes or so. Let's bang through a few problems and try these rephrasings. So I'm going to clear the polling and go ahead and give this one a try. Go. All right, that's 2 minutes. Go ahead and take a shot. See how this goes. Go ahead, just take a shot. All right, we've got a mix of responses so far. And it's pretty split between A, C, and E. So we've got a few different points of view on this one, which is good. So let's think about how we set this one up. Key word here is ratio. What does it mean? How do we write down the ratio of the population to the number of representatives? How might we write that down for one of these districts? Go ahead and type that in, how we would write that down. The ratio of the population to the number of representatives. Yep, go ahead, Emily.
Sorry about that. This is a new computer. I inadvertently hit something. Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I'm seeing people are writing in. Excellent. I'm seeing ratio for people means P over R. And then you have the little subscript just to keep it straight. Those things don't mean anything other than just which district we're talking about. So you could use the colon such as P2R, but I think it's actually better mathematically to use P over R in a fraction, because we can actually do math with that fraction. I lost it there. P over R. Had a little trouble drawing the line there. Oh, P over R. Now I've got it big and blue. So that's the way to usually write a ratio. Thank you. And so asking the question, the ratio is greater for which of the two districts? we should really translate that to, is ratio 1 greater than ratio 2, or vice versa? So how might we write down this question mathematically? Go ahead, type that in. Is ratio 1 greater than ratio 2, or vice versa? Go ahead, type that in. How you might write that mathematically. Great. So I'm seeing a bunch of responses that are akin to this. Is P1 over R1 greater than P2 over R2 or vice versa? Some people wrote in P1 R1 sort of question mark, or greater than or less than P2 over R2 or vice versa. And those are all great ways to do it. So now the question becomes, how can we manipulate this? How can we manipulate this? And it's actually pretty subtle how we can. Any thoughts about how we can manipulate this from this point? Go ahead, raise your hand. Yep, Jean-Laurent.
I don't know, can we cross, I don't remember what the term is anymore, sorry. But cross multiply, I don't know if that's the right way to say it anymore, but.
That is the right way to say it. Can we cross multiply? What do people think? What do you think? Go ahead, type in whether or not you think we can cross multiply this thing. And you know what, Jean-Laurent, you can't see it, but people are agreeing with you. Yes, we can cross multiply. And the reason why we're allowed to is kind of a technical reason. It's because these numbers are positive. These numbers of representatives are positive. And if we didn't know that they weren't positive, we would have a little trouble doing so. But because we know all the numbers in the situation are positive, specifically those numbers of representatives, we're allowed to cross multiply. And so we can turn the question into this. Is P1 times R2 greater than P2 times R1? And that's a bit of a simpler question to sort of look at. And so now we are really dealing with this question. I'd like you to take 30, 45 seconds and consider the rephrased question and these particular statements. And I'm also going to say all variables are positive because they represent numbers of people and representatives. So go ahead and give a shot to your answer. See, you might change it around. Go ahead. Yep, I'm seeing that most of you switched it to C. And in fact, another manipulation that you probably haven't used since who knows when is that if all these numbers, P1, P2, R1, R2, and R1 are positive, it turns out you can actually multiply these inequalities. As long as all the numbers involved are positive. For instance, 10 is bigger than 5, and 3 is bigger than 2. You're allowed to multiply two inequalities together. Man, I got to get off this big old thing here. 10 is bigger than 5, 3 is bigger than 2, and because those numbers are all positive and the inequality signs point in the same direction, I am allowed to multiply the left side and get 30, and I know that that's bigger than the product of the right side, which is 10. So the GMAT recently, in fact, in the 12th edition, it's sort of a change from the 11th edition, and the 12th edition is only a couple months old. the GMAT is starting to emphasize these kinds of manipulations more. So just a little plug for ourselves. Glad you're here. But one of the things we really keep up with what the GMAT's doing, and this subtle change is one of the reasons why we put this problem right into the first session. They are starting to like this sort of hidden constraint in which numbers that represent counts of real things are definitely positive then. And then you can do things to those inequalities or the equations because you know that those numbers are positive. So for instance, we can cross multiply, as Jean-Laurent said, and we can multiply up these two inequalities and guarantee that yes, indeed, we get this. So let's try another question. This one's pretty tough. Dig deep. Let me just reiterate. We're going to try to rephrase the question in the statements, and here is the question. Go to it. You have 2 minutes. That's all right. That's 2 minutes. Take a shot. Go ahead, put it in. Okay. Seeing a variety of answers. In fact, we almost have them all. So, all kinds of things around there. Now, type in quick. Is this a value question or a yes-no question? Go ahead, type it into the direct message window to us. Value, yes, no? Yeah, it's yes, no. So, got to be careful about this. Now, on our paper, we want to get a couple things down. Again, we get the givens on the left side, and there is a particular given here, that p is a positive integer that's given to us. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just suggest a particular rephrasing for this, which is just a translation. You might have seen more deeply into this problem than this, but I'm simply going to try to turn all these words into just something down on paper. So I'm going to say, can the positive integer p be expressed? In other words, can I write p as something else? So there's going to be p equaling some expression with a question mark, like is p equal to that? So the can it be expressed as means, can you write p equal to? So is p equal to the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1? So I don't know what those two integers are, so I'm just going to put them down as boxes. I could make up letters for them. That's fine. I'm going to put in a little star between them to represent times. I could make up letters, as I said, to be, you know, A and B or something like that. But I'm just going to leave them as boxes. And my question is, can I write P as the product of those two boxes? And those boxes are each integers greater than 1. Now, that might not look like that helped us a whole lot, but it got me a way of at least putting this down on my paper This is literally what my paper might look like. And then I can start to try things out. Literally just writing that. So let's go ahead and start with statement 1. If I start with statement 1, and I even write it down as it is, then I have this. So type into the direct message window, what are some possible values of P? Go ahead and type them in to the window. Come on now, dig deep. I'll give you a break shortly. Just statement 1. Yeah, so P can be 32 through 36. Can't be 31, can't be 37. And that was my error. Remember I referred to that earlier? So let's just pick one of these out. Let's say that P is 32. Give me a sign, type it in. Can I write 32 as the product of two boxes with the boxes as integers bigger than 1? And if so, how? Go ahead and type it in. Come on, everybody. Can I? Yeah. Notice how much easier it is to do once you actually get a specific number down. So if P is 32, what is the answer to my question? Type it in. If P is 32, what's the answer to the big old question up there? Can P be written as the product of those two boxes? The answer is yes. Yes, I can. So continuing on, 33, 34, 35, and 36. I was too cool for school, and I did not write these things down. And as I go through each of them, I find, wait a second, you know what? Oops, I put that one in the wrong place. I'm talking while I'm walking. 35 is 7 times 5. 34 is 2 times 17. And 36 is, say, 6 times 6. Obviously, for some of these, there's more than one option, and for others, there's only one option to fit the criteria. But I noticed that every single one of them works. So if I'm told this, if my buddy statement 1 tells me this stuff, then is that sufficient? Do I know the answer to this question? Tell me yes or no. Do I know the answer to this question or this question? P is between 31 and 37, and it's a positive integer, so it's 32 or 36. Do I know the answer to this, to the original question, or as I wrote it down? Some dissension. Some people say yes, some people say no. Catherine, you want to jump on and defend your answer?
I said yes because it's clear that everything is yes. So you can answer the question, and it's sufficient just to have either A or D remaining as your options.
But I don't know what P actually is.
I don't think that matters in this case because you can, well, this is actually where I'm getting a little confused, but I think I understand. Because they're using the word can, so that says, is it possible for the integer P to be the product of two integers? And in this case, it's consistent because they all work. But if it was only one, like let's say you had a number 1 in there, and that would be 1 times 1, and you would get the answer no, would that still be sufficient? And I think that the answer is yes, because it could still have a number, 1 out of the 5 numbers that you could count as, okay, I'll let you talk now.
No, that's all good thinking, except that actually the way that the GMAT thinks about it is this. P is unknown but definite. I think of P as written face down on a card in the middle of the table. And the GMAT walks up to you in this casino in Las Vegas, and P is written down on that card, face down. And it asks you, the GMAT, hey, that's a positive integer right there. Can you express that positive integer, which I'm going to call p, as the product of two integers, each of which is greater than 1? So there is an integer p that exists. Now your buddy comes along and peeks at the card. And that buddy of yours doesn't tell you what the p is, actually, which would be nice, but he or she doesn't. All that person does is say, p is between 31 and 37. It's not either end either. That is actually enough information. So, and that's because we have all yeses here. Now to your question, if we included some number in the range, like say 37, which cannot be expressed this way, I'll just write it down here. 37 only equals 1 times 37. Then you would, and that doesn't fit the criteria, so the answer would be no. If there's some yeses and some no's, then it's no good. It's not sufficient. So to answer your question, if there's something in there that causes a mix of answer choices, of answers between yes and no, then that's not good enough. Whether they express this with is p equal to the product or can p be expressed as the product. Yeah, I think Emily's following up with you online on the chat window. So in this case, because p has to be one of these 5 numbers, we don't know what p is, but we actually do know the answer to the question. Now, statement 2, p is odd. Oh, whoops, before I get that down, we've said that statement 1 is sufficient, so we can cross out B, C, and E. Give me a smiley face or a confused face, depending on how you're feeling right now about crossing out B, C, and E. Okay, I'm seeing it from most folks. All right. I know that's a little peer pressure, but do stop me. Now, P is odd. Is that enough on its own, forgetting about statement 1? Type it in. Is that enough on its own? All your second buddy comes along and says is, hey, P, that number under there is odd. And remember, do not think about this stuff. You don't know this. Is it enough on its own? The answer is no. It's not enough on its own. Remember, don't just count the odd numbers from the first list. You've got to also try some numbers that aren't on that list. Remember, if all you know is P is odd, P could be 7, and 7 cannot be expressed as a product of 2 integers bigger than 1. Now, what that tells us is the answer is A. Before I go on, let me ask, anybody spot anything about P, what this question is asking about P that they put in a different way? Anyone spot anything that they're sort of asking about P? Yeah, Ryan, jump on the mic.
Yeah, what they're trying to ask, it looks like, is whether P is prime, because if P is prime, it's odd unless P would be 2. So they're trying to see if this is odd or prime, I mean.
Yep, they are trying to see whether or not P is prime. Prime is one of those things you're going to read about this week, and it's a property of numbers, which essentially is it impossible to write that number in this way if it's 2 or bigger? So for instance, 7 cannot be broken down into a product of 2 integers bigger than 1. It can only be broken down into itself and 1 as a product. So we label that number prime, and then numbers like these, which can be broken down into these larger numbers, as non-prime. And so you could actually test this out in order to rephrase the question. You should try out some numbers, and it might actually occur to you like, hey, as I do these, I'm recognizing that it's having to do with prime and not prime. So what this question is really a disguised way of asking is P prime? And technically they're asking, is P not prime? But that's really another way of asking, is P prime? So is the positive integer P prime? It's a little bit easier to sort through. Notice that value is not the same as yes, no, because if you leave this as a yes, no question, then notice statement 1 is sufficient. Whereas statement 2, I'm sorry, if we rephrase that question to what is P, we just say, you know what, if I know what P is, I can tell whether or not it's the product of two integers. I'll just say, what is P? Well, suddenly that statement is not sufficient. So never, ever, ever change a yes-no question into a value question. Let me go back to that previous slide for a second. Here we've got a yes-no question, and we had a statement that was sufficient. If we rephrased that yes-no question to a value question, we're rephrasing too far. Always leave a yes-no question as a yes-no question. You can change it to another yes-no question. For instance, we changed it to, is it prime or not? But don't change it to what is P. So let's stop there for 5 minutes. Let's take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we'll start up with some course overview stuff. So go ahead, take a 5-minute break, run to the bathroom, do what you got to do. Come on back in 5. Just while we're waiting here, I'm going to jump back to another slide for a second, the y squared minus y less than 0 slide, and then I'll come back to this do's and don'ts slide.
All right, it looks like everybody is back and ready to go. So let's pick up by talking about the course overview. I'm going to show you what you should have in your materials or what to expect when they get there. I know a couple of you are still waiting. And also explain a little bit about what we'll do in class and how that will relate to the homework. So first, we need to talk about the test itself, because that's sort of how we've organized our materials based on how the test itself is organized. It's a three-part test, and the first part is an analytical writing assessment. We don't have a book for you on that. We're going to cover it in class, and we have some online resources for you to thoroughly prepare yourself for that. But it's kind of separate from the main part of the test. In fact, it's these other two sections that everybody sort of thinks of as the GMAT, because those are the two sections that give you your GMAT score, the one on that 200 to 800 scale. So naturally, we're going to spend most of our time on those. Our books are organized around this. On quant, as we've seen, there are two types of problems, data sufficiency and problem solving. Both problem types are addressed in each of our math books. It wouldn't make sense necessarily to split up books according to problem type when obviously there are so many different math topics that could be covered by either type of problem. I'll show you the books in just a minute, but they're organized basically by topic. The verbal section, however, has three question types, and this is a really natural way for us to organize our books because there are different skill sets for each one of those. So here's what your package includes. There are 8 red strategy guides in all. This is what they look like. The 5 math books are sorted by content, and each has problem solving and data sufficiency in them. In particular, you should note that there's some data sufficiency rephrasing examples given in, I think, just about every book, if not all of them. The 3 verbal guides are just according to the question type. Now, most of your homework is going to start here, but your homework is going to end, or your preparation is going to end, with these and actual practice tests. These are the books that we've been working out of today. These are those retired questions, former GMAT questions. And there are 3 of them. This is what we call the OG, just to keep it simple. It's the official guide, and there are 3 books. One's kind of math and verbal both, and the other 2 are split by the two types, verbal and quant. There's also this little booklet included in your materials. This is a little laminated booklet with a wire binding on it. It comes with a wet erase marker. This is like what they're going to give you on test day. We include it in our materials so that you get a feel for what it's like to do practice problems and do actual test problems with a big fat marker. It's not like doing it with a pencil, and we want to eliminate as much of the weirdness of test day as we can. So yeah, DS is another abbreviation we'll use. That's data sufficiency. Likewise, PS is problem solving. We call SC, CR, and RC for sentence correction, reading comp, and critical reasoning. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. We kind of slip into our little lingo, but you guys will pick it up here. In fact, you will pick it up because it's like that on your syllabus. So here's a snapshot of what we're going to do week by week. The main thing I want to point out to you here is that we're going to do a little bit of math each week, actually kind of a lot of math each week, and verbal each week, just about every week. Some weeks we'll do more than one verbal question type. Okay. Session 9 is a little weird because we're done with math at that point and we just wrap up. And sprinkled in around the edges are things like the essays and general techniques for dealing with the test. This is where we talk to you about actual test-taking skills. Okay, so that's the overview, but how do you know what you're going to do in a given week? Okay. There is a syllabus, and it is part of your welcome guide, so you have that in writing. If you don't, we'll give you the link to that in a little bit. But more generally, the way it's organized is that you'll do 3 activities. You'll do the reading first, you'll do problems to underscore what you've read. These are problems that are not official GMAT problems. They're more like learning problems. They're not there to trick you the way the GMAT problems are. They're just meant to emphasize the ideas. And ultimately, once you get through those learning problems, you'll go to those tricky problems and do the official guide questions. And what you'll notice is that we take a different approach to math and verbal in terms of where we have you do that sequence relative to the class. For math, we think it's really valuable to read and get a little bit of practice before you come to class. You'll find you'll get more out of class, you'll ask better questions, you'll know what to anticipate in class, and you'll have some things kind of on your agenda. And you'll follow up from what we talk about in class with those official problems. For verbal, we think it's a little safer to begin by talking about it in class. We know that you speak English on a daily basis, so your walking around knowledge is good enough to get across our points in class. Once you've seen it in class, we'd like you to do the detailed reading to emphasize that. So here's what the syllabus looks like. Just a little snapshot of it. What we're looking at is what's due for next week. So let me highlight just one piece of this. Since we're talking about math a lot today, notice that number 2 on our list is Number Properties Guide, complete. Well, what does that mean? It means you're going to do the reading and the problems in the entire book. Okay, the entire red book there, labeled Number Properties. What you won't touch is the very last page of the Number Properties Guide, where those questions are listed, the official guide problem numbers. We will cover number properties in class next week, and then it'll be after class that you go back to that red book, flip it open to the last page, and look up the problem numbers on your official guide problem assignment. Okay? Give me a smiley face if that makes sense. I'm not seeing questions coming in, so I'm going to assume that it does, but I'd like to know that you are out there. All right, cool. Now, there's an alternative to the syllabus. It's actually basically the same thing. It's called the Weekly Planner. This is in printed form in your welcome guide as well. And what it is, the only difference is that instead of giving you just a list of things to do for the week, it sort of breaks it out day by day. And you see that here. So day 1 is your class day. For us, that's Wednesday. Day 2 would be Thursday, and so on. This can help you if you just are looking for a little assistance in what to do first, you know, how much should you do at a stretch, and so on. We have a study organizer. I'm going to show you a snapshot of this in just a bit. It's basically an Excel version of this that is sortable and kind of a handy format to have it in. All right. This week, if you haven't done so already, log on to our website with your username and your password to the Practice Center. Within that Practice Center, you'll find all the online resources that you need for the class. Some of the things assigned on the homework are found here. Practice exams are assigned periodically there within this Practice Center. Also in there are some question banks, one for each of those red books. I like using those at the end just to kind of see, am I done with geometry? I'll do the question bank, I'll see how I do on it. Okay, these are sorted by topic. Challenge problems are there, but I would steer clear of those unless you are completely done with everything else. We are recording this session, but you can also watch recorded online sessions on the website. And online labs are pre-recorded tutorials. They're usually listed first on the syllabus for homework. They're about an hour to an hour and a half long, and find those there. All right, I mentioned the welcome guide, so if you don't have that already, you can download that on my Practice Center as well. Any class handouts can be found there too. And if you have administrative questions, this is the place to go. I guarantee you're going to find your answer there. And if not, contact us. Here's what that study organizer looks like. Remember, this is that weekly schedule, basically in Excel form. The study organizer has 3 features. and sort of 3 different uses, or will suit 3 different types of people. The first feature is that it provides structure to those who want it, day by day, task by task. The second feature is that it provides flexibility to those who want that. You can filter it, as you see here, by week or by day, by priority, by activity, question format, even by topic. So for people who really already know they're strong in one area and have to focus on another, they can sort of customize their study plan that way. Okay, and the third use is for those who fall behind. Let's say in this class, or you haven't gotten to all the homework. You can go to this to find out what's the top priority, just to be ready for the next class. And Catherine's asking a great question: how many hours a week should you allocate? If you're doing all of the work, it's between 10 and 20 hours a week. Realistically, we know most people have weeks where they can't do that, so I think this would be very helpful in that case. There is one big difference between this study organizer and weekly planner and the much more general syllabus, which is just very simple in nature. This actually lists fewer problems, or assigns fewer problems, with the idea that quality is better than quantity. So actually, this could save you time and effort in that regard. You can always go back and do the non-assigned questions a little bit later. Another resource to you that, in fact, you should familiarize yourself with this week, even if you don't do official guide problems. We have an online stopwatch, so if you don't have your stopwatch with you, you can log on to our page and actually enter your answers, and it will keep track of your answers, your times, and everything, and export them into an Excel sheet. A related Excel sheet is what we call the official guide tracker. You can cut and paste your answers and your times into that. It tracks how you're doing, produces nice results. It'll help you look at more than just what % are you getting right and how long are you taking on average. It'll break those into question types and so forth, and give you some more useful measures. Okay. I think Chris is answering some of the questions about where to go. I'll let him type in that link. One thing you should know is that you get office hours as part of your class. And office hours are for half an hour each week. You can schedule the half hour that works for you. The sign-up is on the website, and it is use it or lose it. No rollover minutes, so you can't save up 4.5 hours for the very last week. I encourage you to sign up for these even if you think you won't use it, because something will crop up in the homework that you'll want to talk about. Online forums are another place to ask questions. This is on our website. You can ask questions about the practice exams, problems in the red books, GMAT prep questions. That's the practice test available from the makers of the test. What you can't ask about is official guide questions. So that's sort of what office hours are for. We also have some other questions that we can't answer there, just banned sources, those that violate copyright law and stuff like that. So certainly read our guidelines before you post anything there. All right, 2 final things to say about resources. We offer end-of-course feedback. So as long as you complete your end of the bargain, which is that you do a practice exam by next week, and at least 2 more during the course. They don't have to be on the week that they're assigned in the syllabus, but they do have to be by week 9. So 3 total. And we will use that to review and give you some personalized feedback for your game plan for test day. And after test day, we'll stick with you too if necessary. If you didn't get the score you were hoping for, we will meet with you and kind of go over what happened, look at your test results, and see if we can piece together a plan for the next time. Okay, so let's say you don't have 20 hours in a given week. Here's how to prioritize. Top priority for any given week is to do the quant reading so that you're prepared. Then do the online labs. They're meant to augment class and not duplicate things that we cover. Then dig into the verbal strategy guides. Ultimately, though, you want to get to the official guide problem. In a given week, that can slip, but overall, this is kind of your top priority, with the CAT exams done on weeks when you can get to them, since they are a big chunk of time. If you need to prioritize further, focus on your weaknesses. And you probably have a good sense for what those are, but you can use your data that you've collected so far to determine that. Okay? So if you fall behind, don't try to make up the work that's already fallen by the wayside. Focus on the next week so that you'll be ready for that class, and worry about those gaps later on. And definitely come to class. Don't feel like you can't pick up with us. You can always tell us, hey, I didn't do the work this week, don't call on me. Either way, we want you here because we think you'll get more out of being here than not. So here's a couple of timelines. We asked you at the beginning when you plan to take the exam. And for the most part, you guys are telling us timelines that are like one or the other of these. One timeline is typical of people who keep up with the work and are basically done with everything by the time class ends. A couple weeks to polish things, and then they go in and take the exam. A more typical timeline is people who basically keep up but still have to go back and finish some stuff up. So we give 3 months of access to our online resources after class is over, and that's to be used for that additional study time, taking the exam around then. What you'll notice about both of these timelines is that we recommend planning at least to take 2 exams. You might not have to, but if you do, you need to be aware of the 31-day wait period. Okay, so certainly if your school deadline is somewhere out here, take that into consideration. The benefit of planning for a second exam, besides allowing the time for it, is that it can actually take some of the pressure off the first one, increasing the likelihood that you'll hit your target. Now, I don't know, John, you're asking about what timeline do we recommend. I think either one of these is fine. It really depends on the person's situation, their job, their goal score, and how far they have to go. What I would definitely recommend against is waiting significantly longer than 3 months after the class ends to take it, just because people get rusty. Good question. Catherine's asking, if you do take it twice, do they average the score? No, they don't. Schools will take your highest score, and they don't look down on 2 attempts or even 3. Doesn't look bad or anything like that, so all the more reason to just plan to do it. Okay, so one other kind of timeline or study attack plan is which problem should you do. If you do timeline 1 and you're taking the test soon after the course, use this book for topic-focused work, and for random time sets, dig into these 2. So you're sort of reserving these for a certain type of practice. For timeline 2, when you have a little bit more time after the class is over, it's reasonable to save these books for after the class and only work on these during the course. Okay, and again, it's better to master a small number of problems than to just sort of brainlessly go through lots and lots of problems just in an effort to get it done. All right, it looks like I have not missed questions, or if I have, Chris is keeping up with them. If you want to stop me at all, let me know by raising your hand. But just the final slide here, can't emphasize this enough. By being here, you're able to ask questions. Do speak up in class. Questions are what makes the class good, I think, because if you're thinking it, other people are thinking it. Do the work so that you'll be asking good questions. There are no bad questions, but you'll have more of them, and we'll actually get through probably more problems in class the more prepared you guys are. And most of all, let's have fun. And since fun is on our agenda, let's look at sentence correction, which is synonymous with fun, or maybe not. Let's look at what sentence correction tests. This is a very typical sentence correction question where they give us a sentence, they underline part of the sentence, and our job is to figure out which of the 5 phrasings best completes the sentence. Like, which one would you substitute in for the underlined text and make the sentence correct? I'm going to give you guys free rein on this one. I'm going to give you about 1 minute and 15 seconds. Come and take your pick. And it's worth noting that choice A is always the same as the original. So if you like that one, A is your choice. All right, even if you're not completely sure about this one, give me an answer. And what I'm partly trying to illustrate with this and throwing a timed question at you right away is how it can be kind of tough to get to an answer in the appropriate time. I also gave you less time than you were seeing on math problems earlier. Sentence correction should be a little bit faster. So, most of you are actually getting the right answer on this one, so I'm very pleased. We'll talk about why your answers are right or wrong in just a moment. But before we do, let's talk generally about what sentence correction is about. You know, besides the mechanics of, you pick the best completion for the sentence, what makes it the best? Correct grammar is the #1 thing that makes a choice the best. Okay, can't be the best if it's got poor grammar. And grammar topics covered on the GMAT include these. These are basically all the chapters in our sentence correction guide, and we will go through these one by one, basically building a toolbox of rules that you can draw on test day. Okay, so this is 80% of the battle. The good news is actually that most sentence correction questions test more than one topic. So let's say you're iffy on a pronoun issue. You can fall back on something else. There's probably something else going on. But there's secondary issues. Things like meaning come into play. When 2 choices have the same good grammar and the only difference is meaning, your choice will boil down to which one has the better meaning or the more logical meaning. And last and least is concision. You never want to pick a choice just because it's the shortest. But as long as the other 2 things are there, correct grammar and clear meaning, the shortest choice wins. In fact, I'll warn you right now that we're going to see concision show up as a trap more often than it shows up as a real deciding factor, a real good thing to look for. Sometimes the shortest choice is unclear because important words have been left out, or words that make the grammar complete have been left out. So what's going on this one? Now, I started to highlight this while you guys were working, because what I want to demonstrate for you is a way to start thinking about these. Just like on data sufficiency, process is key. And what I'm trying to show with each color is a choice that you have to make. You have a choice between include and includes. There's the S on the end there. Choice between which can grow versus growing. Choice to be 30 feet, as big as, up to. How do they grow, basically. And then there's another split here at the end. And is. And nothing. And being. And is. And it is. Okay, what all of these represent is a choice about something. You'll get to a point where each choice will tell you something about the rules you need to use. Okay, so some of these are simply about word choice. This one I have in blue here is kind of an issue of style. It's acceptable to say to be, grow to be a certain length, or it'll grow up to a certain length. Both of those work. We might want to steer clear of grow as big as 30 feet. Now you can grow big, but 30 feet is a unit of length. Okay, so it's probably better to say grow as long as, and I would steer clear of those just because of the big. But arguably that's an issue of style. So I might, on a question like this, go to something that's a little bit more reliable. Verbs tend to be very cut and dry splits. I want you guys to weigh in on this, especially if you used this or noticed this difference. What tells you whether it should be include or includes? Type in. I'm kind of chuckling to myself because you guys have, by and large, picked the right thing, but some of you have done so for the wrong reason, and that's one of the things we're going to focus on in class. So I'm hearing things like it's dolphin family, it's whales, it's species. Only one of those is right. Yes, and we're going to talk next week about what I'd call judicious ignoring. And it seems like ignoring stuff in a sentence might be dangerous, but not if you do so strategically. Watch this. I'm going to cross through that make up the dolphin family. And I'm crossing through that because what does that do? It basically describes the species, right? Which species? Oh, the ones that make up the dolphin family. Yeah, it's a modifier. All right. And judicious ignoring means I can skip over that because it's sort of optional information. The 32 species are closely related to whales. Notice that species sort of makes sense with that. Species are related. What else is true about the species? Type it in. Yeah, the species are related, and the species include the animal known as the killer whale. So there's something really neat going on here. We have one subject and we're saying two things about it. So it is the species that include. And what that tells you is that species is plural, so we need a plural verb, include. So for that reason, includes in D&E is wrong. And the beauty of that is we don't ever have to look back at D or E again, okay, because we have a clear-cut reason to get rid of them. Is everybody following that kind of logic? Give me a smiley face if so. This is how you get these done quickly, okay? It would take too long to read all 5 of these into the statement. So I'm leaning towards getting rid of B because of as big as. There's one other thing that we can look at, the verb on the end. And there's another thing in the sentence that tells us what it should be. Includes the animal known as the killer whale. We're describing, with what follows that, the killer whale, right? Which can grow and is famous. Two things again, linked by the word and. And since we have the whale can grow, we want to use the same tense of verb, so we want to say and is. Okay, both present tense. And we can get rid of C because being is not a good match there. All right, so what I've hoped to get across here is, not bombard you with rules that we haven't studied yet. But to point out that the process is basically to scan vertically, okay? We don't want to read left to right 5 times. What we want to do is kind of skim top to bottom and see what's the same and what's different. And a split like this, include versus includes, is good for a couple reasons. It's very clear-cut, based on a rule, and it's also a 3-2 split. So whichever way we decide, we get rid of almost half the choices. Okay. The next thing to do would be to scan vertically again for the next good split. What's going to get rid of the most choices most clearly. All right. And that's what we're going to call splitting and re-splitting. So it's a good idea to read the sentence first, just to get your bearings and know what it's trying to say, get the meaning down. Then start your vertical scan. Start with a 2- or 3-way split, pick a side, and then go to the next split. Okay? And one thing you can do just to train your eye to see the splits is actually highlight, in your book or on a Xerox copy of a page from your book, the various splits, so that you know you're always, that you know you're looking for them, and because they're not going to be useful to you if you don't see them. 4 principles about this before we move on to something else. First principle is, don't be a stickler for the best sentence ever, okay? Just has to be the best sentence of what is given, okay? So don't waste any time rewriting the sentence the way you'd like it to be seen. And here's an actual example from the book. This one is correct, but people often read this and are like, I don't like this, are so lacking. That sounds weird in math skills. They also say, well, what is them? Is it students? Skills, industries? There's a lot of things that them could mean. It could maybe even mean something that's not even mentioned. But it turns out the GMAT considers this good enough. Them clearly refers in the GMAT world to students simply because students is the main subject. What you would want to do on a problem like this is see what else they're offering you. Look at those splits. What you're likely to find is they're introducing even worse problems into the other 4 choices. Principle 2 is that you don't want to rely on your ear. And this is true even if you're a native speaker of English. What sounds right to you might be wrong, simply because you hang out with people, as we all do, who don't always use perfect grammar. And even those who use perfect grammar don't always use the GMAT's preferred grammar. So here's a classic example of that. She plays classical instruments like cello and oboe. Like is legitimately used to introduce examples, which is what these are. But the GMAT is a lot pickier about this. It only means similar to on the GMAT. The GMAT insists on such as, for examples. I don't know why, that's just the way they do it. I think the rationale is that it introduces an alternate interpretation, right? She plays classical instruments like cello and oboe. Well, that could be violin and flute or something like that. You guys could tell me better than anyone. I know you guys play some of those instruments. Principle 3, the corollary of this. What sounds wrong to you might actually be right. So if you gave this sentence to 10 people on the street and asked them to memorize it, and then you hid it from them, and then later asked them, well, what did that sentence say? I guarantee you they would all come back with a sentence that begins the Maya, because that's what everyone would remember about them. So they'd say, oh, the Maya built huge palace and temple clusters because they were architects and stonemasons. Or they'd say, the Maya were architects and stonemasons who built huge palaces, etc. My point with this is, we typically speak and even write in a way that's different from the GMAT. We tend to like to put the subject first. The GMAT tends to like to open sentences with modifying phrases. So it might sound funny to you just because of the order, but it's not inherently wrong. 4th principle, as you're looking for splits, is to look even for the little ones. They love to trip you up with little word endings or small words. We saw it with an include and includes with the little s on the end of it. Here's another example. I don't know that I'd pick up on this without looking at what the other choices are. Extra expenses were eliminated and reduced. That actually doesn't make sense. It's got to be one or the other. It would help hone in on that issue if you notice that split. I've got to tell you, I'm not the biggest fan of this one as an example. I've got some conditioner in my shower right now, hair conditioner, that says it's for dry or damaged hair. Really, it could be used on both, right? So there's very little difference in and or in that case, but sometimes it can be significant. All right, so how are we feeling about sentence correction? You guys ready to at least go tackle some of these with these in mind? Give me a smiley face if so. All right, great. We're on to the last part of tonight where we're going to talk about the test itself. Now, some of you have probably already learned a little bit about how the test is graded, how your score is actually generated, but I'm going to quickly review it for us. Here's how the scoring algorithm works in an idealized fashion. So I'm going to use Amit, or is it Amit? Hope you don't mind me messing up your name. Actually, you didn't get a chance to say hi to the group earlier. Amit, would you grab the mic now and just say hi, tell us where you are, and then I'll use you as our example person here, which won't require anything from you except for to sit there and let me talk about you.
Hi, do you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. I actually turned your volume up just a little bit, but it sounds great now. So hop on, tell me the pronunciation of your name and where you are, where you work. I think you were probably talking into the abyss. I think you clicked after you spoke. Why don't you try that again? Just click, make sure your name is above the audio indicator down there, and then talk.
I think this is much better now.
All right, we'll come back to you. You can practice that later. I'm sorry. No worries. But this is you, and you are the perfect test taker, because what we're seeing here is your ability level. So it's not at 100%. So I'm not saying you're perfect because you know everything and you don't do anything wrong or you don't answer anything wrong. You're the perfect test taker because you do exactly what the GMAT algorithm expects you to do. And that is demonstrate your ability level wherever your ability level happens to be. And the way that works on this test is you know enough to score right here. So for any question they give you that's easier than that level, you should get that question right. Okay, now everybody's going to get a question in the middle to begin with, because the algorithm doesn't know anything about people when they walk into the test room. And this problem's way too easy for you, Amit. So you're going to get that one right. The algorithm learns something. You can handle 50-level question, give you a harder one, see what you do. Now this one's below your ability level too, so you should get it right. And you'll get a harder one as a reward for that. But as soon as the questions get too hard or above the line, the algorithm basically expects you to miss them, okay? And you get a lower level question as a result. And what you see happening is this convergence. With every question, the algorithm learns that below the line is too low for you, and all of these are too high for you. So it's figuring out as it goes that your ability level must be in the middle. Okay? And roughly speaking, towards the end of the test, these questions are pretty much tuned to your ability level. And where you end up is what you get. So give me a smiley face if that is making complete sense to you. And fire away if there are questions. Cool. Now here is something interesting. What I'm showing is actually two perfect test takers. This is me, and let's say this is me down here. Ability level is lower. So certainly not perfect in terms of knowledge, but I am perfect in execution. The GMAT is still feeling around for what questions I can handle. I always answer the ones below my line correctly and miss the ones above my line. And so something that is significant about both of these people is that where they end up is where what score they get. They also both miss half the questions along the way, just because they're roughly going to see half questions that are above the line. And as a result, the test will feel bad to everyone. It doesn't feel particularly good to miss 50% of the questions or even 40%. So everyone's going to kind of feel like they've been put through the ringer. Plus, there's, especially for advanced test takers, there's sort of no break in here. There's no easy ones on which you can coast, especially towards the end of the test. They may feel easy to you, but technically they're not. Now, Catherine's asking a good question about, like, what if you miss some? Yeah, because I've already said these are perfect test takers. Nobody is perfect. So it's entirely possible that Amit would actually, he should get this one right? The one I'm circling here. But what if he didn't? Totally just sort of randomly click the wrong button or something. He would get an easier question. But, you know, he'd probably get that one right, and he'd be back up to this question right here 2 questions later. So an isolated error isn't such a big deal. It would have to be a lot of this type of thing to add up. And I will actually show you a picture of that, okay? So you don't have to be, you know, exactly like this. In a way, this is simplified. Does this contrast prompt any other questions for you guys? Let me ask you guys, what would your strategy be based on this, knowing how it works? I knew you guys were plotting what to do. What does this mean to you? What should you be doing? Angela and Rashawn are saying, get the early ones right. Jean Laurent is saying, if the question seems hard, be more inclined to take a guess. Catherine's saying, be consistent. Don't leave a lot of questions at the end of the test. Andrew, yeah, make sure you get these first few correct. Yeah, let's address all of those theories. The one about, you know, worrying about the beginning of the test first is probably the most prevalent myth out there. I know I believed it when I took the exam the first time. It basically goes like this. The first 7 to 10 questions set the tone for the rest of the exam. It seems like that here, right? That's where our divergence between me and Amit happened. But what would you do to be sure that you're getting these right at the beginning? I mean, what do you know, cross your fingers? What's the method that people use to do so? Yeah, there's really no other way except for take a little bit extra time. Yeah, and actually, that is the big problem. Okay, let's look at why it's not such a big deal to mess up at the beginning and why you don't set the tone poorly as a result of doing that. If you miss a couple questions, even a few in a row at the beginning, you still have a lot of questions ahead of you. So as long as you keep eventually start answering a string of them correctly, you're eventually going to get back up to the level where you otherwise would. Okay, So I showed you just like, what if you missed 1 or 2 randomly? This would even be true if you missed, I think maybe 3 or 4 possibly at this stage of the game. The key is you've got a long time to redeem yourself here, or a lot of questions in which to do so. The flip side of that is, if you did spend a little bit of extra time, or as most people do, a lot of extra time at the beginning, you run a much greater risk of this happening. Okay, and this is what several of you mentioned in terms of strategy. You want to make sure you answer all the questions, because if you don't, they count as wrong answers, obviously, since you didn't get the right answer in. But even if you got an answer in, it would be more likely to be incorrect because of rushing. Okay, and a string of wrong answers at the end leaves no time for recovery, and so it does tend to depress your score. And actually, I'll quantify this for you in a little bit. This line is basically what happens when you answer randomly and get a bunch wrong. The line I just drew in is what happens when you leave them blank. Okay, there's actually a punishment for blank answers. So that's our first strategy for you. Make sure you get an answer in, even if it's completely random, if you are running out of time. Okay, the other theory that some of you guys mentioned, I'll hop back here. John Laurent and Catherine were on to something. This thing about these hard questions and keeping moving, guessing on the hard ones and maintaining an even pace is really the best strategy there ever was. If I were to try to game this system, what I would really like to do is to see how difficult the question was. You know, if I were to write a wish list, when a question pops up, there'd be like a little message box that says, this one's a 750 question. If I'm aiming for a 700, I don't care about that one. I'm expected to miss it. I would guess strategically and move on. And if a question popped up and said, this is a 300 level question, as Chris said, I'd respect it. I need to get that one right, or the algorithm's going to start doubting whether I really deserve a 700. But they don't tell you how hard the question is. The only indicator that you have is how long it's taking you. Usually the longer it takes, generally the harder it is. Okay, so if you find yourself struggling with a question, tell yourself it's one of these and I don't need to get it right. Okay, give me a smiley face if that makes sense to you. And conversely, if you get a question answered too quickly, tell yourself, well, that's probably an easy one. I better double check it. Okay, so it's sort of like, you know, aim for an average time that's a little bit evened out. A little bit longer here, a little bit less time here. All right. Now here's one other thing that happens to people. Random errors below the line. Okay, and notice that there's a lot here. What is this, 8? Okay, 1 or 2 of these won't hurt you, but a bunch will. There seems to be a straw that breaks the camel's back with stuff like this, and it can drag your score down. I occasionally do post-exam assessments with students, and when people describe their test experience and they say things like, gosh, it was going so smoothly, I felt like I was really doing well, you know, I was kind of sailing along, I felt good about it, the question seemed easy, and then they get a score that is a surprise to them, chances are this is what's happening. It seemed easy because they were missing enough that the algorithm didn't ever really give them the hardest problems. Okay, and it can happen due to holes in the foundation. Perhaps the overall ability level is up at the green line, but the ability level for geometry questions or data sufficiency perhaps is down here. So these are actually above the line for that question type. Okay, so the natural thing to do there is to work on that particular weakness. Plus, be careful and respect every problem if it is just a matter of rushing and making silly errors. I've been talking a lot about difficulty level of the questions, and difficulty level is kind of a funny thing. You can't just tell by looking at a question or even doing a question how hard it is. Because, you know, you may be good at that particular topic and it may feel easy to you, even though there's something tricky about it that makes it difficult for other people. In fact, you may look at a problem and feel like it's really difficult, and maybe there's just something about it that you're missing. It's technically an easy one. So you really can't, you know, give it too much thought. And the GMAT writers don't try to guess this either. They actually measure difficulty level by running it by a bunch of test takers. 1,000 to 2,000. What they get is like information about how many people, what percent of people miss it, and also which people tend to miss it. High scorers, low scorers. And what that implies for you is two things. About a quarter of the problems that you see will be experimental, which means they're collecting data from you to be used to kind of vet problems to give to future test takers. Okay? So if you are worried about a particular question, there's a very good chance that it's an experimental one. Okay? Main message there would be, don't think too much about how it's going. That easy problem that you're worried about indicating that you've done something wrong, well, it may be an experimental question that they need some data on. And also, don't waste too much time on any difficult problem either. It may be experimental, and all the more reason that it doesn't matter to you. Okay. Now, you are going to see about the same number of questions as everybody else. Everybody at all levels will see experimental questions at all levels. So I can speak to this. The time I did the best on the test, I was running out of time at the end, and I was worried about it, and I saw a string of easy questions. And, I mean, they were like pretty easy, like 1 + 1 = 2. It was almost at that level. And I think they were probably experimental. If I had been paranoid about it, I would have thought, I must have done something wrong and canceled my score. That would have been a huge mistake, okay? Don't read too much into it. Any questions at this point? See some people typing, so I'll pause. Catherine asked about the score. So you can cancel your score. It gives you the opportunity at the end. Once you've entered that last question or the time has run out, it says, do you want to compute your score or do you want to cancel it? You should always say, compute the score. Okay. If you cancel it, it basically shows up as if you showed up on test day but nothing was recorded. Sort of like dropping a class in college. Yeah. All right. A couple more things to note. Remember that thing about guessing at the end is better than blanks? Well, here's proof of that. This has actually been measured by some empirical studies. 3 test takers. The thing about these guys is they have the same ability level. They should all get a 70 percentile. And the guy who finishes on time gets that. Okay? He's lived up to his potential. He's performed the way he was expected to. He made 0 random guesses. How many guesses do you think he made overall? Type it in, guess. Is it 0 overall or something else? I've seen several different numbers, 5, maybe 8, maybe on 10 he guessed. If he happened to guess on the 10 experimental ones, it certainly wouldn't hurt him. What I'm really hoping to get across to you is that in order to avoid randomly guessing at the end, you will have to strategically guess throughout the test. So 5 is not an unreasonable number of guesses to make. 4 or 5, I think, is typical. And that is true of all of us instructors. I've never scored below 760 on this test. I've taken it 3 times, and I have guessed every single time. And in fact, my only regret on any of these tests was when I looked back and I realized I should have guessed but didn't. Yeah. So no random guesses, but strategic guesses. When you randomly guess, you're probably going to get 1 right and 4 wrong. That results in about a 1.2 percentile per random guess at the end, lost. Okay, not too terribly bad, but you want to avoid that. And here's what you really want to avoid. 3 percentile per blank is what you lose. So they actually take more than twice as many percentile points away from you for blanks than they do for wrong answers. That's significant. All right, so for our purposes, what we're going to come back to over and over again is this issue of, not only do you know the material and can answer questions accurately, but can you do so in an appropriate time, okay? So you should start to measure yourself, time and responses, and see where you are on this grid. Natural places to work are those where you're too slow and getting too many wrong. You'll find that as you brush up on the material, both your speed and accuracy will increase at the same time. But there's still, benefit to be gained here in these 2 yellow zones. We want to get in this zone. So how do we do that? There's basically this loop that we will work in, much like studying any other subject. We're going to build that foundation in class and by having you do the work. As you go on, you'll be collecting data on yourself. We'll talk later about how to assess how you're doing, whether you have sort of reached your target. Use that assessment to plan which weaknesses to work on next. And towards the end of this whole process, like week 9 and beyond, we'll talk about how to develop your game plan for the actual test day. Let's talk a little bit more about building that foundation and what's involved in that. I showed you the syllabus and the class organizer earlier. Basically, these are the components. The work we do together, the work you do on your own, the timed practice that you do in online labs and so on, and the interaction that you have in office hours. Going to official guide problems to apply your knowledge and repeat it by revisiting topics from time to time is key. I'm going to talk about timing drills in just a moment, how to time yourself. But this is basically aimed at learning the content and kind of drilling it, plus practicing a little bit of test-taking skill as well. So this is our last slide tonight. This is what we want you guys to do. These are the best habits that we've observed. Get in the habit of using a stopwatch. You probably should not be doing official guide questions unless you've got a stopwatch in hand or timing by some other method. Because it's irrelevant how many you get right unless you also get them right in the appropriate time. For inaction questions, the ones at the end of the chapter in the red book, check the answers as you go, because those are organized so that the easier questions are at the beginning. They get kind of harder as you go along. You want to sort out any issues before you emphasize or practice bad habits on the rest of them. So you check your answer, make sure you're on the right track, apply it on the next question. For official guide questions, the ones that are like from the old tests, you can do those in sets and check the answers after the entire set. Even if you time the whole set, time the problems individually. Lap button on your stopwatch is good for that. Keep your scrap paper. I encourage you to keep it in a notebook and use consistent techniques. So Chris showed you what to write down on data sufficiency. And I showed you could write down choices on sentence correction. Basically, what you want to do is create a little paper trail for yourself. As you review problems, you want to look and see, was I noticing the right things? Your scrap paper can be a great place to go to see where you went wrong, if you went wrong. So track your work to see the results of all that. And it's usually better to work in short bursts more frequently than a marathon on the weekend. So use your day-to-day study organizer as a guideline for that. And we'll talk more about reviewing your work in a later lesson. Okay? But we do encourage you to review your work even if you get the answer right. At the very least, read the official guide explanation and think about an alternate approach to the answer. So make yourself a more flexible test taker that way. And with that, we are done with our first session. I'll let Chris hop on and address any questions that I missed in the chat window. There was a lot going on there.
think I was able to keep up with most folks, but if I missed anything, definitely text in. I know I'm going to hang out. I'm sure Emily will too for a bit to answer your questions. And great job this first class. I hope it's been you found it useful. And there's going to be a lot of work for next week. Definitely take advantage of the office hour homework help. You look in your welcome guide on how to access that as you go through the work. So really excited to be working with you all, and I know Emily feels the same. And let's turn on. We're going to turn on the chat window so that you can text to each other as well. And if you want to text to us privately, you see just below where you type in, it says send to. Just choose send to moderators, and you'll be sending just to us. We removed the chance of sending publicly to make sure that you send private responses to us. But I hope you all also communicate with each other, and really looking forward to working with you all. So thanks a lot. We're going to turn off the recording now.